For our project, we took a look at the company Monsanto and their subsequent acquisition by Bayer. Monsanto was founded in 1901, and their first big product was artificial sweetener, which they sold to Coca-Cola. And through the subsequent two world wars, they expanded their operations and began manufacturing products like aspirin and synthetic rubber to help support the war effort. They really expanded into chemicals. Into the 1970s, they made DDT and Agent Orange, which was, of course, used during the Vietnam War. And in the 1990s, they really cemented their reputation as a giant in bioengineering and the agricultural sector. They pioneered artificial growth hormones for dairy cows, genetically modified seeds, and chemical herbicides such as Roundup. They were acquired in 2018 by Bayer, which is a large multinational German corporation. Bayer's mission is health for all, hunger for none. So there's a lot of overlap and ways that they could use Monsanto's products to further their mission. But we're also going to take a look at some of the ethical issues of Monsanto's products and challenges for incorporating those into Bayer's current state. They publish comprehensive annual sustainability reports that cover their CSR initiatives, corporate governance policies, and stakeholder engagement. On the CSR side, they're committed to sustainability programs, especially in agriculture and small farmers. Community health is a priority, especially in underserved communities. And lastly, environmental conservation. They're committed to renewable energy, reducing their carbon footprint, and increasing biodiversity. On the corporate governance side, Bayer has strict code of conduct in place, and they expect all of their employees to behave ethically. They also have strong protections for workplace safety and the environment. And lastly, they have a zero tolerance policy for bribery and corruption. Bayer also does a lot of stakeholder engagement. They engage with farmers, they collaborate with research institutions and NGOs, and they have public forums to make sure that there is a two-way flow of information between the company and its stakeholders.
So now let's look at both the strengths and weaknesses in Bayer's current ethical practices. Firstly, Bayer excels in strong governance and compliance. They have implemented rigorous internal audits and compliance programs, ensuring that their comprehensive code of conduct guides all employees to adhere to the highest ethical standards. Furthermore, their active stakeholder engagement is evident through regular forums and public consultations. Additionally, Bayer's commitment to sustainability is clear through their investment in green technologies, such as developing environmentally friendly crop production products that reduce chemical usage and promote biodiversity. However, there are areas that Bayer must address. Lingering controversies from the Monsanto era, especially ongoing lawsuits related to glyphosate, continue to affect public perception and trust in the company. The complex integration of Monsanto's operations have also posed challenges, particularly in aligning Monsanto's historically aggressive marketing practices with Bayer's ethical standards, requiring significant restructuring and retraining. Lastly, there is a perceived lack of transparency regarding the risks and benefits of Bayer's products, with critics pointing out that their communication on the safety of certain pesticides could be clearer and more comprehensive.
We were able to identify 5 ethical issues that Monsanto had to acknowledge. The first ethical issue that we're going to dive into is the glyphosate controversy. So glyphosate is the active ingredient in Monsanto's product Roundup. It's a chemical that contains an enzyme blocker. Therefore, when sprayed onto crops, it is able to attack unwanted vegetation such as weeds and kill it and prevent it from growing. Unfortunately, after many consumers started utilizing the product, many lawsuits and allegations came about saying that glyphosate was cancer-causing. Monsanto was then placed under regular scrutiny about the health and safety risks of the product. So then they were placed into a dilemma of helping farmers get a high crop yield with their product and growing their brand, but they also had to acknowledge these allegations of the health and safety risks of the product. Basically, they were having to balance corporate interests with public health concerns.
Our next ethical issue we're going to look at is the environmental impact aspect. Now, both Bayer and Monsanto invest millions or did invest millions into environmental conservation. Monsanto actually received many awards for their efforts, including investing into saving the honeybee population, which has been struggling. But part of the reason that that animals such as the bees have been struggling is monoculture agriculture, which, if you don't know, this is just like huge farms. Like, picture the Midwest where there's just thousands of acres of corn or soybeans and you don't see anything else. And this is really challenging for local native animals like deer and bees and birds to survive because they don't have their ordinary food sources available. And so Monsanto's products really encourage monoculture farming. But furthermore, they encourage a dependency on these chemicals, these herbicides and things. One of the unforeseen consequences of using chemical herbicides is that the weeds evolve, and now we have what are known as super weeds, which are resistant to glyphosate, for example. Additionally, these chemicals leach into the water and impact communities downstream, and the effects of using these chemicals are felt long after that season's harvest is over.
Okay, so now let's discuss some key ethical issues Bayer has faced, particularly in the realms of lobbying, influence, and transparency. First, let's look at lobbying and influence. Historically, Monsanto, now part of Bayer, has been heavily criticized for its effort to influence regulatory decisions and public opinion. This includes funding research that supports its products and attempting to discredit independent studies that raise concerns about their safety. For example, Monsanto funded studies that downplayed the risks associated with glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. Independent studies classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic to humans, leading to public outcry and legal battles. Monsanto's lobbying extends to even influencing regulatory bodies and policymakers. The company has fought against labeling requirements for GMOs and has been involved in drafting legislation that benefits its business interest and often working closely with government officials. So, this issue ties into virtue ethics, which emphasizes honesty and integrity in corporate practices. Now, let's address transparency. There have been ongoing concerns about how Bayer communicates the risk and benefit of its product. The need for clearer, more honest communication with both the public and regulators is paramount. For example, Monsanto faced criticism for not fully disclosing the potential health risks of its GMOs and pesticides. Internal documents revealed that Monsanto had ghost-written studies attributed to academics. Concerns have also been raised about Bayer's transparency in communicating the safety and environmental impact of its products, such as neonicotinoids linked to bee population declines. Public skepticism and distrust have grown due to perceived secrecy and lack of transparency.
We also took a look at intellectual property and farmers' rights. There have been hundreds of lawsuits filed by and against Monsanto over the years by farmers. There's an age-old tradition in farming and gardening where at the end of the year you save seeds. You're able to replant those seeds next year and cut down costs. But because these seeds have been genetically modified by Monsanto, they have a large upfront investment and they need to recoup that investment by selling new seeds every year. So it is forbidden for farmers to save seeds. And a kind of a gray area thing that happens is, say, the wind blows some seeds onto another farmer's property and the seeds become cross-pollinated. Well, the Supreme Court in the US has decided that Monsanto still owns the right to those seeds. And so therefore farmers are required to pay royalties on those seeds, even if it was inadvertent and they had no knowledge that these were Monsanto seeds growing on their farm. And because of some of these legal aspects with IP, but also the financial stress on farmers, because with the consolidation of there's just a few large producers of GM seeds, they're able to drive up the price every year. So the financial pressures on farmers are actually quite intense. They always have been, but technology like this is making farming more expensive and there's higher pressure. And a very tragic result of that is that there's been a huge increase in farmer suicides due to the stress that they face. And India in particular, there are estimates that several 100,000 farmers have committed suicide in the last 2 decades because of these pressures. And many people point fingers at Monsanto for the blame for this. Lastly, we wanted to talk about sustainability and food security. So, one of the major challenges of our time is going to be feeding the world's population. And there are estimates that global demand for food and feed will increase by 50% between now and the year 2050. Currently, the global agriculture produces enough food for the current population. But the changing climate will pose new challenges to that. And even now, 30 to 40% of food is lost through waste and spoilage throughout the value chain. So much of the food that is grown never reaches consumers. And so bioengineering presents a very feasible solution to that. So these growth hormones for cows, for example, increase dairy production by 10 to 15% with the same amount of space, the same amount of inputs. And seeds can be bioengineered to adapt to extreme heat and drought. And like we talked about, glyphosate, Roundup, there's Roundup ready seeds, so you can just spray your corn with Roundup and not have to fight weeds all season long. So the challenge is to balance these various ethical aspects and stakeholders, which we will get into, with how do we solve this major problem while respecting local cultures, traditions, economies. And for example, the EU has banned growth hormones in milk, and there have been 33 countries, I believe, that have banned glyphosate usage. So the US and the FDA have determined that these products are safe for human consumption, but other countries around the world don't agree with that. As you might infer from the ethical issues that we identified, there are also a huge amount of stakeholders that are impacted by Monsanto and Bayer's operations and decision making, and it ranges from farm animals and plants and the natural environment, soil, water, wildlife, to consumers, developing countries, the global economies, shareholders, employees. There's just a huge amount of living things that are impacted by these companies. And so as a result, there are also short and long-term implications and challenges to navigate, reputational damage and legal actions and regulations and environmental and public health impacts. And so it's just a huge challenge. And what Bayer has to do at this point in time is reckon with the past, some of the harms that have come from Monsanto, but at the same time recognizing the huge accomplishments and engineering feats of Monsanto and the importance of these technologies and our dependence on these technologies for our future. And so we're going to take a look at some strategic recommendations on how they might navigate these challenges.
So, enhancing transparency in communication. Bayer has made strides in this area by implementing guidelines for transparent communication and providing open access to internal safety studies. For example, Bayer's publication of glyphosate safety studies have been a positive step. However, to build on this, we recommend conducting regular audits of communication materials to ensure accuracy and transparency, implementing training programs for employees to foster a culture of openness, and establishing public forums for engagement to allow stakeholders to voice their concerns and receive clear responses. While resistance to change might be a challenge, fostering a culture of transparency through leadership commitment and internal incentives can drive compliance. Ethical lobbying and influence. Bayer has established a code of conduct for responsible lobbying and reports on its lobbying activities. For instance, Bayer's transparency in disclosing lobbying expenditures is commendable. To ensure these practices are ethical, we suggest reviewing lobbying activities regularly for ethical alignment, developing stringent ethical guidelines for lobbying efforts, and setting up an independent oversight committee to monitor lobbying practices. Balancing corporate interests with ethics is challenging, but emphasizing long-term reputational benefits will help maintain public trust. So coming on to strengthening CSR initiative, Bayer aligns its CSR initiatives with UN Sustainable Development Goals and partners with various organizations for impact assessment. For example, Bayer's partnership with NGOs to support rural education in India is a notable initiative. Our recommendations include developing a comprehensive impact assessment framework and engaging third-party evaluators to ensure unbiased assessments. Involving stakeholders in planning and execution to ensure their needs are met would be significant as well. So, measuring impact accurately is essential, and collaborating with third-party organizations can provide robust assessment frameworks. Coming on to sustainable agriculture practices, Bayer invests in R&D for sustainable technologies, provides farmer training, and implements sustainable practices across the supply chain. An example is Bayer's initiative to train farmers in sustainable farming techniques in Africa. To further this commitment, we propose regularly tracking the progress of sustainable practices, measuring environmental impact reduction through quantitative metrics, and advocating for supportive policies that promote sustainable agriculture. Although high initial costs are a concern, partnership and grants can subsidize investments and demonstrate long term benefits. Coming on to robust stakeholder engagement. Bayer has mechanisms for stakeholder engagement and regularly publishes detailed reports. For example, Bayer's engagement with local communities through health and education program demonstrates its commitment. We recommend identifying and mapping key stakeholders to understand their influence and interests, and creating platforms for regular dialogue and feedback, developing mechanisms for addressing and resolving concerns raised by stakeholders.
The first recommendation we have is enhancing transparency in their communication. So this will be done through things like audits and surveys, just utilizing numbers to see how many communication audits are given, making sure that stakeholder satisfaction scores are high, and also just reviewing engagements and seeing where those engagements are made, especially with all the media attention that Monsanto had faced. The second recommendation we have is ethical lobbying and influence, again, through audits and surveys. This is monitoring compliance rate with the ethical guidelines, the frequency of lobbying activity reports, and reviewing the number of corrective actions that have been taken. The next recommendation we have is strengthening the CSR initiatives, again, through different forms to gather feedback from the stakeholders. It's going to allow them to review the percentage of CSR initiatives that are aligned with the SDGs, the impact of assessment scores, and then also seeing stakeholder engagement levels. The next recommendation we have is sustainable agricultural practices. This is to review how many farmers are trained, and if they are trained, they can use that information to make changes in the future and implement new strategy. This recommendation will also allow for review of R&D expenditures on sustainable technologies and also the sustainability index. The next recommendation we have is having a very robust stakeholder engagement. How many stakeholder meetings are being held? What are the feedback from those meetings? And what the feedback response time is from the company. These monitoring and evaluation recommendations we think will have a large impact on the company moving forward. It'll allow them to have solid data to be able to review the stakeholder feedback given on their product, and then utilize that to either take any corrective action, make change, and ensure growth of their product. In conclusion, Monsanto really did enhance the biotechnology and agricultural world. They were able to create a new product that helped crop yield and assisted farmers in their agricultural endeavors. Unfortunately, this product did cause a lot of challenges and ethical issues in the agricultural sector that Monsanto and Bayer did have to face. Moving forward, the company really is going to have to implement strong strategy to be able to pivot their brand image that was portrayed because of their past occurrences with the product. If they monitor, evaluate, and implement the strategies that we recommended, I believe that the company can thrive.